Hello P6, welcome to Monday's maths lesson. Now today we are going to get warmed up with a two-part task. In part one we're going to be asking ourselves which one of these amounts we would rather have. Would we rather have 1/3 of £75 or 1/4 of £80? And a few more examples. Now let's remind ourselves how to do these. 1/3 of £75. Well, what does 1/3 normally look like? Well, what we would normally do is put a 1 as our numerator and a 3 as the denominator. Now, 1/3, well, fractions are always about dividing. So if I want to know 1/3 of £75, then what I need to do is take my £75 and I need to divide it by 3. Now, if you can't work that out in your head, find a space at the side of your page, go and do a sum. So do your division calculations. So 7 divided by 3, that's 2. Remainder 1, 15 divided by 3, that's 5. So 75 divided by 3, that's going to be £25. 1/4 of £80, well, 1/4 would normally look like that. 1/4 of 80, so that just means 80 divided by the denominator, which is the 4. 80 divided by 4, that's going to be 20. So which one would I rather have? Would I rather have £25 or would I rather have £20? I'd definitely rather have £25. So I put a circle around the one that is the larger amount. So in the first part, you are thinking about which one of those you would rather have. Remember, divide by the denominator. In the second part of our warm-up, I've given you 5 number sequences and they're all about adding or subtracting. What I need you to do is work out what's happening in each sequence and then can you add or subtract to work out what the next 4 numbers in that sequence will be. So for example, in number 1, I've got 19, 23, 27, 31. Well, I can see the numbers are getting bigger. And as I've told you, today we're either adding or subtracting. So if the numbers are getting bigger, that tells me that I'm definitely adding. What am I adding? 19 becomes 23, becomes 27, becomes 31. Yeah, I'm going to be adding 4 on every time. So if I'm adding 4, I'm at 31. What's 31 add 4? Yeah, that's going to be 35. Add another 4. 39. Add another 4. 43. Add another 4. Yeah, that's going to be 47. So in number 1, I'm adding 4 on, so I've worked out my next 4 numbers. In number 2, 3, 4 and 5, again, ask yourself, is it getting bigger? Am I adding? Is it getting smaller? I'm taking away. What am I adding or taking away? Now, that is your warm-up task P6, but our main task today is again all about decimals. Now, last week we were starting to learn about decimals. And we learned last week that decimals, well, the first bit of decimals is all to do with something called tenths. A quick recap of what we did last week. I've got lots of rectangles and each rectangle has been divided into 10 little squares. There are 10 squares in each of these rectangles. So each rectangle is divided into 10 parts. That means for every one little square that I've got, well, that is the same as 1/10 of the rectangle. So each square is equivalent to 1/10 of the whole rectangle. Now, another way of writing tenths is to start using something called decimals. So if in this first rectangle, let's just look at the first one. If in the first rectangle, I coloured in 1, 2, 3 out of those 10 parts. If I was writing that down as a fraction, I would write down 3/10. But last week we were learning that there's another way that we can write this down. Instead of writing 3 as my numerator and 10 as a denominator, what I can do is I can write it as what's called a decimal fraction. 3/10 becomes 0.3. Why 0.3? Well, the 0 tells me that I haven't coloured in the full rectangle. I would have needed to colour in the whole thing if I was going to have a number other than 0 there. But I haven't coloured in the full thing, so there are no full rectangles coloured in. point, my decimal point, 3. 0.3. The 3, the number after the decimal point, is what's called tenths. The number after the decimal point is the tenths number. And the tenths number tells me how many out of the 10 parts I've coloured in. So I've coloured in 3 out of 10. 3 tenths, 0.3, they're exactly the same as each other. What about in this one? If I coloured in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, how could I write that one down? Well, I could write it down as a fraction, so I could say that 7 tenths of it has been coloured. What's that one going to be as a decimal? It's going to be 0.7. 0, because I haven't coloured in the whole thing, 0.7. The 0.7, the 7 tells me it's 7 tenths. Could you tell me what I would write down in that one? If I've only coloured in 1 out of the 10 parts, well, what's it going to be as a fraction? Yeah, it's going to be 1 tenth. What's it going to be as a decimal, P6? If I've coloured in 1 out of the 10 parts, it's just going to be 0.1. If I had to colour in 0.9, what would you do then? If I said to you, go and colour in 0.9, well, hopefully you would think, well, 0.9, that just means 9 out of the 10 parts. So hopefully what you would do would be go and colour in 9 out of those 10 parts, because if you've coloured in 9 out of the 10 parts, you've coloured in 0.9. What would it mean if I asked you to go and colour in 1.0? Well, if the number after the decimal point is the tenths, the number before the decimal point, that's the units number. The units number is telling me about the whole thing. How many whole shapes do I need to colour in? If it tells me 1.0, well, 1.0 means I actually have to colour in one whole rectangle. And to colour in one whole rectangle, how many of the 10 parts have I coloured in? I've actually coloured in 10 tenths, haven't I? I've coloured in 10 of the small individual squares, but by colouring in 10 tenths, I've coloured in the whole rectangle. Now, that's what we're going to be thinking about today for our decimals. Because, let's have a look at these two. In the first one, can you see that I have coloured in some of these individual squares with red? Now, what can I say about what I've coloured in? Well, I could say that I have coloured in, well, let's count. I've coloured in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 parts. Now, those 14 parts are what we call tenths. They're tenths because each shape is divided into 10 parts. So out of these individual squares that are tenths, I've coloured in 10 and another 4, I've coloured in 14 of them. I could also say that I have coloured in one rectangle completely, and in the second one I've coloured in 4 of the 10 parts. So I could say that that is the same as 1.4. I could also say it's the same as one whole thing and 4 tenths. All of these together are exactly the same as each other, P6. Let's look at it again. 14 tenths. It's 14 tenths because each shape is divided into 10 parts, and I've coloured in 14 of these tenths 10 in the first one and 4 in the second one. I could also describe it as being 1.4. The 1, that's my units number. My units number tells me how many whole shapes I've coloured in. The 0.4, that's my tenths number. It tells me in this second shape I've coloured in 4 out of the 10. Final way I could write it, I could write one whole thing, so one whole shape is coloured in, and 4 out of the 10 are coloured. What could we do with this second one? This time round I've got 3 different rectangles, but they're not all completely coloured in. 2 of them have been completely coloured in, so all 10 parts have been coloured in. But in the last one, 9 have been coloured, 1 hasn't. Well, let's first of all start off by looking at how many tenths we've got. So I've got 10 tenths, another 10 tenths, and 9. So 10, 20, 29 tenths have been coloured in. 29 of these individual little sections. 10, 20, 25, 29 tenths have been coloured in. I could write that as a fraction, as a decimal. I could say that 2 have been completely coloured in. And in the third one, I could say that 9 of these tenths have been coloured in. So I could say 2.9. Another way I could write it, I could say 2 have been completely coloured in. And I could say that 9 out of the 10 parts have been coloured in. 2 and 9 tenths. So again, these are all the same as each other. 29 tenths, because there are 29 little squares that have been coloured in, and each of those is 1/10 of the shape. I could say that I've coloured in 2 completely, 0.9, because 9 out of the 10 parts in the last one has been coloured in. Or I could write it this way, 2 whole shapes and 9 out of the 10 parts. These are all equal to each other. They all mean exactly the same thing. Now, we can show decimals by colouring in shapes, by breaking shapes up into 10 parts and colouring them in. But what we can also do is we can look at decimals on a number line. Now let's have a look at some decimals on a number line. So I've got some number lines here that go from 0 up to 5. And can you see, P6, that between each of these numbers, they have been split up into 10 parts. So from 0 to 1 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 steps. So each of these little steps is the same as 1/10. So if I wanted to put an arrow on my line, if I wanted to put an arrow there, I wonder what number that's showing me. Well, there's 0, there's 1. I haven't got as far as 1 yet, so that is going to be 0 point. Now, how many little steps after 1 have I gone? After 0 have I gone? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That arrow is pointing at 0.7 because I've gone past 0, 7 little steps. I haven't made it as far as 1. Where is that arrow pointing? Well, I'm between 1 and 2, so I've gone past 1. So I'm going to say it's 1 point. How many little steps? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That arrow is pointing at 1.8 because we've gone past 1 and 8 more little steps. These are all tenths. If I wanted to put an arrow at 3.2, could you work out where the arrow would go if it was at 3.2? Well, if I wanted to put an arrow at 3.2, I need to go to find the 3. There's the 3. And the 0.2 means I have to go 2 little steps after it. So 3 and 2 more little steps. So there is going to be 3.2. Now, if I go down to the second number line, and if I was to put an arrow there, what could I say about that number? Well, I could say that that number it's after 1. So I could put a 1 there. Point. How many more steps after 1? 1. It's 1.1. Now, if I thought about that 1.1, I could describe it in a different way as well. I could say that if I had started at 0 and I had just counted in little steps, and remember these little steps are all tenths, to get to 1.1, I would have to have gone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 tenths. 1.1 is the same as 11 tenths because it takes 10 steps to get to 1 and then just one more step to get to 1.1. So if I've got to 1.1 from 0, if I'm counting from 0, it's taken me 11 tenths to get there. If I wanted to get to that number, well, can we work out what that number is? So I've gone past 3. I haven't got as far as 4 yet, so it's going to begin 3 point. Well, how many little steps are we after 3? Well, I'm just one step before 4. So I'm at 3.9. Now if I take that 3.9, how else could I say that? Well, if I'd started right back at the start and I want to get to 3.9, then if I went 10 steps, that would get me to 1. 10 more steps would get me to 2. 10 more steps would get me to 3. So I've gone 10, 20, 30, and then how many more steps to get to 3.9? Another 9. So 3.9 is actually the same as 39 tenths. If I was just counting in these little individual steps that are called tenths, then it would have taken me 39 little steps to get as far as 3.9. Now P6, for your tasks today, there are 2 main parts that you're going to have a go at. In the first part, you'll need some colours. And what I want you to do in this first part is use your colours to colour in what you can see has been shaded and is unshaded. Now we're going to write them as decimal fractions. So have a look at the first one with me. These are all flags or pennants. That's just a fancy way of saying a flag. Look in the first one. How many parts have been shaded? Well, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 out of the 10 parts have been shaded. So if it's 8 out of 10, how do I write 8 out of 10? Well, I start off with 0.8. 0.8 tells me that the whole thing hasn't been coloured in, but 8 out of the 10 parts have been coloured. Now, how much hasn't been shaded? How much is unshaded? Well, 2 out of the 10 parts haven't been shaded in. So to write 2 out of 10, 2 tenths as a decimal, I write 0.2. So for each of these shapes, you need to write down what has been shaded and what hasn't been shaded, what's unshaded. In part 2, you're shading to show the decimal that you have been given. So for example, in this one, if it tells you to colour in 2.2, well, the first 2 means 2 whole shapes. So I need to colour in 2 shapes completely. And then I've coloured in 2 shapes completely. 0.2 means I just need to colour in 2 out of the 10 parts. So 2.2 means 2 of them completely coloured in. 0.2 means 2 out of 10. So for your first worksheet P6, you're going to be doing lots of colouring. For your second worksheet, what I want you to do is think about what we were just looking at there to do with some number lines. Have a look at the number lines and see if you can do some labelling on the number lines. Can you look at these number lines? It goes 0, 1, 2, 3 and 4. There are arrows pointing at different places along the line. Underneath each arrow, can you write down what decimal number is being shown? So in the one that's been done for you, there's an arrow pointing here. It's between 3 and 4. So we've gone past 3, so my decimal number begins with 3. How many little steps after the 3 have they gone? They've gone 8 steps, so that's 3.8. So can you write in the decimal numbers? In part 2, can you do it the other way around? Can you put the arrows on the line to show these different numbers? In the third part, can you have a go at working out the equivalence? 36 tenths is the same as 3 units and 6 tenths, which is 3.6. Can you fill in the other ways to do it? And then have a go at the final question. You've been given some numbers that have got decimals in them. Can you work out which ones are talking about units, about tenths, and about tens? Now be careful, P6, because we know about tens and units. The number after the decimal point is your tenths, okay? So don't forget, tenths are the numbers that come after the decimal point, okay? So tenths come after the decimal point.